The rain fell in thin silver lines through the bars of the cell, dripping from the rusted ceiling beams and pooling on the dirt floor. Dr. Lena Voss sat with her back against the cold wall, arms wrapped around her knees, her breath slow but tight. In her chest, the smell of damp metal mixed with something sharp blood from a previous prisoner. The cell was barely large enough for her to stretch her legs. Every sound outside echoed inside like a warning. The heavy boots of guards, the hiss of machinery, the low growl of something alive. She had been on Tharun for only 2 weeks before the capture. 2 weeks was enough to know this planet wanted humans dead. The alien High Council had declared Earth their enemy decades ago. Any human who set foot here was a trespasser, a spy, a parasite. The penalty was always the same: death through the bars. She could see the sky, a thick sheet of gray, cut by the jagged towers of the alien capital. Red banners hung limp in the drizzle, marked with the black crest of the council, a clawed hand crushing a sphere. The sound came first: hollow clang of a gate being drawn back, then footsteps, slow and deliberate. 3 guards appeared. Their armor was black and ridged, their faces hidden behind smooth masks of burnished steel. The one in the center held a control rod, its tip glowing faint orange. They stopped at her cell. "Human," the middle guard said, voice sharp, mechanical. "The council has passed judgment. Your life will be taken by the cubs." Lena's stomach tightened. She had heard the rumors the cubs were bred in hidden pens, taught from birth that humans were prey. They were faster than wolves, stronger than tigers, with jaws that could snap bone in a single bite. The council used them as a public execution. Spectacle. It was more than killing. It was humiliation. They unlocked the cell. Cold hands gripped her arms, pulling her to her feet. She stumbled but forced herself to walk. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her beg. They led her down a long corridor, lit by flickering strips of pale light. The smell grew stronger with every step. Musky, sharp animal. The walls were wet with condensation, and somewhere, far ahead, came the sound of low, rhythmic breathing. The corridor opened into a vast circular chamber. The floor was stone, cracked and scarred from years of claws scraping against it. A tall fence of metal bars curved around the center. Behind it, shadow moved. A crowd filled the tiers above the Chamberlainian citizens in deep red cloaks, their eyes glinting in the dim light. Whispers passed through them like wind over dry grass. The guards pushed Lena forward until she stood just outside the fence. From the far side, another gate clanged open. They came forward slowly, 4 of them. The cubs. They were larger than she imagined, already up to her hip in height, their bodies lean and muscled. Their fur was a deep, mottled gray, streaked with darker stripes that shimmered in the light. Their eyes glowed faint gold, fixed on her with unnatural focus. One lifted its head and sniffed the air. Another's tail lashed side to side in a predator's rhythm. The crowd leaned forward. A low growl rolled through the chamber. The guard at her side pressed the control rod against the gate. The bars slid open with a hiss, leaving her standing inside the pen. The gate closed behind her, trapping her with the cubs. She tried not to move too quickly. She had read once that predators were triggered by sudden motion. Her boots made soft sounds on the stone. Cubs spread out, forming a loose arc in front of her, the largest of them. Its head scarred from an old wound, crouched low, its ears pressed back, her breath caught. This is it, she thought. It lunged but not at her. Its body slammed into the cub on its left, knocking it sideways. The startled cub let out a high-pitched yelp. The largest one planted itself between Lena and the others. Hackles raised. The crowd gasped. The second cub recovered quickly, circling around. Lena stepped back, her heart hammering, but again the large cub blocked its path, growling. The sound was deep warning, protective. She couldn't understand. Was this some kind of dominance fight? Was she in the middle of it? The third cub padded closer, head low, teeth just visible. Lena froze, but before it could get nearer, the smallest cubba, slim, quick one with one ear slightly torn, darted forward and snapped at its legs. The larger cub yelped and retreated, limping slightly. Now all 4 cubs were looking at each other. Tension crackling in the air. The scarred cub turned its head toward Lena. Its golden eyes met hers. She felt something pass between them, not thought, not speech, but recognition. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. The guards looked at each other. This was not how executions went. Lena dared to take a step backward, expecting the cubs to close in. Instead, all 4 of them moved with her. Forming a half circle between her and the rest of the pen, she glanced toward the bars, half expecting the guards to storm in. But they stood frozen, their control rods held loosely. The scarred cub growled not at her, but at them. A ripple of unease moved through the chamber. Whispers turned to sharp voices. The guards shifted uneasily, their masks hiding whatever expression they wore. One of the cubs, she thought it was the smallest, moved closer to her side until she could almost feel the heat of its body. It sniffed the air near her arm, then let out a low, steady rumble. The scarred cub stepped forward, nose lifted, ears swiveling toward the sound of movement above. Lena followed its gaze to the tiers of aliens. The crowd was restless now, some leaning forward as if to see better, others drawing back as if afraid. The cub's growl grew louder. The others joined in, their voices weaving together into a sound that filled the chamber. Not a hunting cry, a warning. Lena realized with a jolt they were warning the crowd. Away from her, her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. This didn't make sense. Everything she knew about the cub program said they were conditioned from birth to kill humans without hesitation. Something in them had broken the training. Or maybe it had never worked on them in the first place. A sharp command cut through the noise. One of the guards slammed the control rod against the bars. Electricity sparked along the fence. The cubs flinched but didn't retreat. The scarred cub snarled, the sound sharp enough to silence the crowd for a heartbeat. Lena didn't know how long they stood there, frozen in that impossible standoff, the human prisoner in the center, for predator cubs forming a living shield around her, and hundreds of alien eyes watching in disbelief. Then, without warning, the gate to the pen slid open again. A tall figure entered, draped in a black robe with the council's crest on the chest. The crowd went silent. The figure stopped just inside the gate, looking at Lena, then at the cubs. Its voice, when it spoke, was cold and flat. "This is an error," it said. "One that will be corrected." It gestured sharply to the guards. Lena didn't know what they meant to do, but the cubs seemed to understand. Smallest pressed closer against her leg. The scarred one lowered its head, teeth bared, ready to strike. The figure's voice cut through the tension again. "Take them to the pens. All of them. Tonight." The crowd erupted in noise, some shouting in anger, others in confusion. Guards stepped forward, control rods sparking. The cubs shifted their weight, ready. Lena's eyes darted from one guard to another. She had no plan, no weapon, only the strange, impossible fact that these creatures, these killers, had decided she was theirs to protect. As the first guard reached for her, the scarred cub moved like lightning. It launched itself at the guard's chest, knocking him to the ground. The smallest cub darted between Lena and another guard, snapping at his weapon hand. Sparks flew. The crowd roared in chaos. Lena dropped to her knees beside the fallen guard, grabbed the control rod from his hand. She didn't even know how to use it, but it felt solid, real. A piece of power in her grip. Above the din, she heard the black-robed figure shout something she couldn't understand. More guards surged toward the pen. The cubs closed ranks around her, forcing the guards to step back. Her mind raced. She didn't know why this was happening or how long it would last. But one thing was clear: the cubs weren't going to kill her. They were going to fight for her, and that meant she might have a chance to live. But only if she could get out of here before the council decided to kill them all. The gate behind the black-robed figure was still open, and Lena knew she had only seconds to decide whether to run. The rain had stopped, but the smell of wet stone and iron still clung to the air. Lena's pulse thundered in her ears as she stood inside the pen. The 4 cubs pressed close around her like a living wall. The open gate was only 10 meters away. but 10 meters could be a lifetime if the guards decided to fire. The scarred cub's low growl vibrated through the stone floor. The smallest cub shifted its weight from paw to paw, restless, as if urging her to move. A guard lunged forward with his control rod raised. Sparks hissed at the tip. Before he could strike, the largest cub slammed into his legs with bone cracking force, sending him sprawling. The crowd above shouted, some in outrage, others in wild excitement. The black-robed council officer barked a command in the alien tongue. 2 more guards rushed in from the sides. One aimed the rod at the scarred cub's flank, electricity arcing in the air. The cub didn't retreat. It leapt at the weapon, jaws clamping on the metal shaft. Sparks exploded in a blinding flash. Lena didn't think. She bolted toward the open gate, her boots slipping on the wet stone. The smallest cub darted ahead of her, weaving through the space between guards, snapping at their hands, forcing them back. The other 2 cubs fell in behind her, keeping the gap open. The black-robed figure moved to block her path. Up close she could see its skin, a dark scaled texture that caught the light like wet obsidian. Its eyes were pale and unblinking. It drew a curved blade from beneath its robe. "You will not leave this place alive, human," it said. The words chilled her. But before she could react, the scarred cub lunged from behind her, hitting the figure square in the chest. The alien stumbled, the blade clattering to the ground. Lena didn't stop to look back. She sprinted through the gate. The passage beyond was narrow, the walls slick with moisture. Her breathing came in short, sharp gasps. The cubs followed, claws clicking against the stone, their panting filling the tunnel. Behind them, sound of pursuit grew, boots pounding, voices shouting orders. They burst into a larger corridor, dimly lit by pale strips of light. She had no idea where it led. The smallest cub brushed against her leg, then bounded ahead, nose low to the ground, as if tracking a scent. The others followed without hesitation. Lena ran with them, every muscle in her legs burning. At each turn, she caught glimpses of other passageways, most sealed by heavy gates, some leading into darkness. A shout echoed from somewhere behind them, followed by the sharp crackle of a control rod discharging. The smallest cub suddenly stopped. At a wall panel, it rose onto its hind legs, pressing its front paws against the metal. The panel gave a faint hiss, then slid open just enough to reveal a narrow maintenance shaft. The cub ducked inside without hesitation. Lena followed, her shoulders scraping the sides as she squeezed through. The shaft was pitch black, except for the faint glow from the entrance. She crawled forward, feeling the cold metal beneath her hands and knees. The cubs moved ahead easily, their claws clicking softly on the surface. The air smelled stale, dust mixing with the faint scent of machine oil. Behind them, shouts faded slightly, but not enough. They were still being hunted. After what felt like minutes of crawling, the shaft widened into a small chamber filled with pipes and humming machinery. A grate on the far wall let in a thin stream of bluish light. The scarred cub padded over to the grate, pressing its nose against it. With a sharp jerk of its head, it pulled the metal loose. Cold night air rushed, and Lena crawled forward, sticking her head out. Below was a narrow alley between 2 high walls, slick with rain. The drop was about 3 meters, not too far, but far enough to risk a bad landing. One of the cubs leaped first, landing with a muffled thud. The others followed, moving with the silent grace of predators. Lena lowered herself as far as she could, then let go. She hit the wet ground hard, pain jolting up her legs, but she stayed on her feet. The alley smelled of rot and smoke. Distant voices echoed from somewhere above, but no guards were in sight. The smallest cub sniffed the air, then trotted toward the shadowed end of the alley. Lena followed, her heart still hammering. They emerged into a maze of back streets. Crates and barrels were stacked high against the walls, steam hissing from grates in the ground. Strange neon symbols glowed faintly in the distance. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed. Lena slowed, catching her breath. The cubs gathered around her. There, golden eyes scanning the darkness. They weren't just following her. They were guarding her. It didn't make sense. None of this made sense. But there would be time for questions later, if they lived through the night. Somewhere in this city. The council was already hunting them. If the cubs really meant to protect her, that made them just as much a target. As she looked down at the smallest one, its torn ear twitching as it sniffed the air again. "All right," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Lead the way." And together, they vanished into the dark streets. The sound of their steps swallowed by the rain. The rain above had turned into a steady downpour. But down here in the city's underbelly, the air was dry and stale. Lena kept her head low as she followed the smallest cub through a narrow passage littered with scraps of metal and discarded crates. The walls were close, patched with rusted panels, and every shadow felt alive. She could still hear it, the faint, echoing stomp of boots somewhere behind them. The council's pursuit squads weren't giving up. The scarred cub moved just behind her, its muscles tense, ears twitching at every sound. The two other cubs stayed on her flanks, their eyes sweeping the dim corridors. They weren't just following, they were escorting her like she was part of their pack. The smallest cub stopped suddenly. Nose pressed to the ground, gave a short, sharp huff, then darted into a side tunnel almost too small for Lena to fit. She crouched, ducking low as she squeezed through. The metal scraped her shoulders, and the smell of oil grew stronger. The tunnel sloped downward, and soon the walls turned into rough rock, streaked with black mineral veins. Pipes and cables clung to the ceiling like tangled vines, somewhere far. Ahead, water dripped in slow, steady beats. Lena's breathing was loud in her own ears. "Where are we going?" she whispered, knowing they couldn't answer. The scarred cub glanced back at her briefly, as if checking she was still there, before nudging her forward. The tunnel opened into a larger space, a cavern carved from the stone, its floor uneven and scattered with broken machinery. Thick support beams held up the roof, their metal surfaces corroded with age. In the far corner, a cluster of old cargo crates sat half buried under dust. The smallest cub padded over and began sniffing at the gap between them. Lena moved closer. Crouching to peer through the space, she saw nothing but darkness. Then a sound like footsteps. Too light to be guards, too irregular to be machinery. She straightened quickly. Scanning the cavern, the scarred cub froze, ears pricked forward. A low growl rolled from its throat. From the shadows beyond the support beams, figures began to emerge. They were alien soldiers, but not the armored guards from the arena. These Warlighter Gearsleek flexible suits marked with the silver crest of the Pursuit Division. Their faces were uncovered, their skin the same scaled texture Lena had seen. On the council officer, their pale eyes caught the dim light like mirrors. There were 6 of them, moving in perfect silence. Weapons drawn, Lena's stomach turned to ice. The leader, a tall alien with a scar running across its jaw, raised its weapon, a short black rifle with a faint blue glow in the barrel. "Target located," it said in a low, calm voice. The cubs moved instantly. The 2 on Lena's flanks stepped forward, hackles raised, teeth bared. The scarred cub positioned itself in front of her, blocking the leader's line of fire. The smallest darted to the side, disappearing into the shadows. The soldiers didn't hesitate. 2 of them broke off, moving to flank. The others kept their weapons trained. Lena's mind raced. She had no weapon, no cover. If they fired, this would be over in seconds. A flash of movement came from the shadows. The smallest cub leaped from a stack of crates onto the nearest soldier, its claws raking across the alien's arm. The weapon clattered to the floor. Cavern exploded into chaos. The scarred cub charged the leader, slamming into its legs with a force that knocked it back into a support beam. The 2 flankers opened fire, blue bolts of energy slicing through the dust-filled air. One shot grazed the floor near Lena's feet, sending shards of stone into her legs. She dove behind a crate, heart hammering. The sound of growls, shouts, and weapons discharging filled the space. One of the cubs lunged at a soldier's arm, teeth sinking deep. Another pounced on a second soldier, knocking them to the ground in a tangle of limbs. The leader recovered quickly, swinging its rifle like a club at the scarred cub. The blow glanced off its shoulder, and the cub roared, snapping at the weapon. Lena's eyes darted to the fallen rifle near her. It was only a few meters away, lying on the ground in the open. She swallowed hard, then made a dash for it. The nearest soldiers saw her and raised their weapon. But before they could fire, the smallest cub barreled into them. Knocking the aim wide, Lena slid across the stone, fingers closing around the weapon's grip. It was heavier than she expected, and its surface was warm. She pointed it toward the leader. "Back off," she shouted, her voice shaking. The leader paused, eyes narrowing at the sight of the rifle in her hands. But it didn't step back. It took a slow, deliberate step forward. The scarred cub moved between them again, growling so deep the air seemed to vibrate. The leader raised its weapon to strike Lena.
Ow!
Squeezed the trigger. A crack of blue light exploded from the barrel, slamming into the support beam just above the leader's head. Sparks rained down. The alien staggered back, momentarily blinded. "Move," she shouted to the cubs. They didn't need telling twice. The smallest cub darted toward the gap behind the cargo crates, the others falling in around. Lena backed toward the tunnel, weapons still raised. The soldiers shouted after them, but none followed immediately, too busy tending to the ones the cubs had injured. They slipped into the narrow passage again, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. Lena's hands shook as she clutched the weapon. She glanced at the scarred cub walking just ahead of her. Its fur was streaked with dust, and there was a fresh burn mark on its flank from one of the energy bolts. "You saved my life again," she whispered. The cub didn't respond, but its golden eyes flicked toward her briefly before it padded onward. Into the darkness, somewhere up ahead, water dripped again steady, patient. Like a clock counting down, they hadn't escaped yet, not even close. The air in the tunnel grew colder the deeper they went, the sound of dripping water echoing off the stone walls like a slow heartbeat. Lena's legs ached from crouching, and her hands were stiff from gripping the alien rifle, but she didn't dare relax. Behind them, the distant hum of machinery told her the pursuit squad was still searching. The cubs moved silently, their paws making almost no sound on the uneven ground. The scarred cubs stayed at the front, ears twitching with every faint noise, while the smallest darted ahead from shadow to shadow, scouting the path. The other two flanked her, their golden eyes constantly scanning the darkness. Lena couldn't believe it. They weren't just running anymore. They were moving like a unit, a pack with a purpose. The tunnel widened unexpectedly into a vast underground chamber. The roof soared above them, lost in shadow, and enormous stone pillars rose. From the floor, like ancient trees, faint blue bioluminescent moss clung to the walls, casting the space in an eerie glow. The smallest cub padded forward to the edge of the chamber, sniffing the air. It gave a low chuff, and the others immediately froze. Lena tightened her grip. "On the rifle?" "What is it?" she whispered, even though she knew they couldn't answer. The scarred cub turned its head slightly, listening. That's when she heard it, too, a faint, rhythmic hum. Not like machinery, not like footsteps. It was deeper, heavier, and it was getting louder. From a far corner of the chamber, a shape emerged. At first it looked like another alien soldier, but as it stepped into the dim blue light, Lena saw it was much larger, taller than any guard she'd seen, its armor heavier, its shoulders bristling with mounted gear. 2 glowing red lenses replaced. Its eyes, scanning back and forth, an elite hunter. Her stomach dropped. She'd heard whispers about them in the research files on Tharun. Hunters were single-unit assassins, trained to track and kill without backup. Fast, relentless, and deadly. The cubs reacted instantly. The smallest darted back to her side, hackles raised. Scarred one stepped forward, lowering its head in. A challenge. The hunter didn't slow it, strode toward them, each step echoing like a drumbeat. Lena glanced around the chamber. There was no other exit but the way they'd come. Couldn't outrun this thing. The hunter stopped about 20 meters away, its head tilting as it studied them. Then, with no warning, it drew a long, black-bladed weapon from its back. The hum in the air grew sharper, was energy-charged. The cubs didn't wait for it to attack. The 2 on her flanks shot forward in opposite directions, circling around. The scarred cub charged head-on, roaring, drawing the hunter's attention. It swung the blade in a wide arc. Sparks burst as it struck the stone floor where the scarred cub had been a heartbeat earlier. Lena's instincts screamed at her to hide, but instead she lifted the rifle and fired. The shot grazed the hunter's shoulder, leaving a glowing scorch mark on the armor. It turned toward her. Her chest went tight. The smallest cub leaped between them, snapping at the hunter's leg. The strike didn't pierce the armor, but it was enough to throw off its aim as it lunged for her. The scarred cub slammed into its back. The two others darted in from the sides, biting and clawing at the gaps in the armor. For the first time, the hunter stumbled. Lena saw an opening, a panel on its lower back, exposed when it twisted. She aimed and fired again. The shot hit squarely, and the panel exploded in a shower of sparks. The hunter roared, dropping to one knee. The cubs didn't stop. They tore at the damaged area until the armor split. The hunter's movements grew slower, more erratic. Finally, with one last strike from the scarred cub, the hunter collapsed to the stone floor, its weapon clattering away. The chamber went silent, except for the sound of Lena's ragged breathing. The cubs gathered around her again, tails twitching, bodies tense in case the hunter rose, but it didn't move. Lena lowered the rifle, her hands shaking. She looked at the scarred cub, who stood over the fallen hunter like a commander inspecting a victory. You planned that," she said quietly, the realization hitting her. The cub blinked slowly, then turned toward the far wall, where faint cracks in the stone hinted at another passage. They weren't just running anymore. They were choosing where to go, what to fight, and when to strike. And if the cubs could plan an ambush against an elite hunter, maybe, just maybe, they could outthink the entire pursuit division. The scarred cub chuffed softly. The pack moved toward the hidden passage. Lena followed, the rifle heavy in her arms, a strange sense of hope stirring in her chest. They were no longer prey. They were becoming something far more dangerous. The narrow passage sloped upward, the air slowly changing from cold and stale to fresh and damp. The walls turned from stone to rough wood, reinforced with old metal sheets that rattled faintly under the cub's paws. Lena kept one hand on the wall, the other on the alien rifle, her mind still replaying the fight with the hunter. She hadn't imagined that the cubs had worked together, timing their moves, forcing the enemy into position for her to land the final shot. That wasn't instinct. That was strategy. The smallest cub trotted ahead, tail flicking as it sniffed the air. Its torn ear twitched every few seconds, as if picking up sounds Lena couldn't hear. The scarred cub brought up the rear, glancing back now and then, checking for pursuit. The two others stayed close to her sides, their presence oddly reassuring. A pale light appeared up ahead, filtering through a narrow break in the passage wall. The smallest cub slipped through the gap without hesitation. Lena followed, squinting as she stepped into the open. She froze. They were standing on a ledge overlooking a hidden bowl of green in the middle of the jagged, black mountains. The air was warmer here, carrying the scent of wet earth, and something sweet, like wildflowers. At the valley floor, scattered among the trees, were clusters of round huts made of clay and woven reeds. Smoke curled from a few chimneys, and figures moved between the buildings. Lena's first thought was that they were Tharoon villagers, but something was wrong. The figures were different, taller than humans, but their skin was a softer shade, without the harsh scales of the council's soldiers. And then she saw them, cubs. Dozens of them, not just the gray-striped predators she knew, but others different colors. Different markings running freely among the villagers. She blinked hard, wondering if her eyes were playing tricks. One of the villagers looked up toward the ledge. Their eyes met. The figure didn't shout, didn't call for guards. Instead, they raised a hand in a slow, deliberate wave. The scarred cub gave a low, rumbling sound, almost like a purr, and began walking down the narrow path into the valley. The others followed, tails held high. Lena hesitated. Was this a trap? Or had she stumbled into the one place on this planet that didn't want her dead? The path wound through thick, moss-covered trees. As they neared the huts, villagers stepped out to watch. Their clothes were simple woven cloth. Leather belts in their faces were calm, curious. No one carried a weapon. A tall woman with pale green skin and dark braids stepped forward. She looked first at Lena, then at the cubs. Her eyes lingered on the scarred one, and a small smile tugged at her lips. "You brought her," she said, her voice low but warm. Lena blinked. "You speak my language?" "Not perfectly," the woman admitted, "but well enough." She gestured toward the huts. "You're safe here." For now, Lena glanced around. Safe, on Tharun. "How is that possible?" The woman's smile. "Fated because we are not the council," she said. "We left them a long time ago." One of the other villagers stepped forward, holding a carved wooden bowl. Inside was fresh water, clear and cool. They placed it on the ground, and the cubs began drinking eagerly. Lena's eyes kept drifting to the other cubs in the village. They moved freely, unrestrained, playing with the children, napping in the shade. No chains, no cages. The woman seemed to notice. "They are not weapons here," she said softly. "They are family." Lena crouched beside the scarred cub, running, her fingers lightly through its fur. "Out! But the council trains them to kill humans," she said. "They train most of them," the woman corrected. "But some resist. It is rare, but it happens. We call them the freeborn. When we can, we take them away before the council can break them." Lena felt a lump rise in her throat. "Is that? What happened to these four?" The woman's eyes darkened. "If they defended you, then yes, they have chosen you. And now the council will not stop until they destroy them and you." A low horn sounded in the distance. The villagers stiffened. The woman's head snapped toward the valley's edge. Lena's stomach twisted. "What is it?" The woman's voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "Dropships." Lena looked up through the break in the mountains. Against the dark clouds, she saw them, three black shapes descending, their engines glowing faint orange. The scarred cub stepped in front of her, growling low, the other three forming a half circle around them. The woman placed a hand on Lena's shoulder. "You can stay," she said. "But if you do, you must be ready to fight." The dropships grew closer, their engines shaking the air. Lena looked at the cubs, her strange, impossible protectors, and then at the villagers preparing for battle. She had no choice anymore. She would fight. The first rumble of the dropships rolled over the valley like distant thunder. Lena stood in the open space between the huts, the alien rifle gripped tight in her hands, her heart pounding in rhythm with the engines above. The cubs were restlessers, twitching, tails flicking, growls low in their throats. The villagers moved quickly but without panic. Some carried bundles of arrows tipped with a faintly glowing resin. Others unrolled nets strung with jagged metal hooks. Children were hurried into the largest hut at the far end of the settlement, guarded by two older villagers with long spears. The tall woman with green skin narrow-strode toward Lena, her braids swaying. She carried a bow unlike anything Lena had seen before, smooth wood reinforced with bands of black metal, strung with a shimmering silver cord. "They will land in the clearing beyond the northern ridge," Era said, her voice steady. "If we let them reach the valley, we lose everything." Lena glanced toward the narrow path they'd descended earlier. "You want to fight them up there?" Era nodded. "Hey, the cubs will know where to strike. They've done it before." Scarred cub let out a sharp bark, as if confirming her words. The smallest one trotted over to Lena, brushing against her leg, then darted toward the path. Glancing back to make sure she followed, they moved quickly, winding through the trees, until the valley floor gave way to the rocky slope. The air was cooler here, the smell of rain sharper. When they reached the ridge, Lena saw them, three dropships hovering just above the clearing. Their hulls were black, bristling with weapons. A side door on the nearest ship slid open and armored. Soldiers began to drop to the ground. Era raised her hand, signaling to the archers hidden in the rocks. The first volley of arrows arced through the air, glowing tips streaking toward the soldiers. Several struck home, detonating in bursts of blue fire. The cubs moved in then, silent blurs against the gray stone. The smallest leapt onto the back, of a soldier before he even turned, dragging him down. Another darted between two others, snapping at the joints of their armor. The scarred cub hit a group head-on, its roar echoing off the ridge walls. Lena stayed close to the rocks, firing. At any soldier who broke from cover, the alien rifle's recoil jarred her shoulder each time, but she didn't stop. A soldier collapsed in her sights. Another stumbled and fell. The battle was chaos, shouts in the alien tongue, the hiss of energy weapons, the crack of bows, the thud of paws on stone. The air smelled of burning resin and scorched metal. A sudden shadow passed over her. She looked up just in time to see one of the dropships shifting position, its side turret turning toward the ridge. Down, Era shouted. The turret fired, blasting the rock face in a shower of shards. Lena ducked, her ears ringing. One of the archers screamed and fell, clutching a burned leg. The scarred cub appeared at her side. Blood on its shoulder, but eyes sharp. It growled, then bolted toward the dropship, weaving through soldiers as energy bolts scorched the ground around it. The other 3 cubs followed, moving like a single mind. They reached the ship's landing struts. The smallest cub leaped on too. The nearest one, claws finding purchase in the metal. The others followed, scrambling upward toward the open door. Lena's breath caught. This was insane, but it was working. Soldiers inside the ship shouted in alarm as the cubs burst in, their snarls and roars mixing with the sound of smashing equipment. The dropship lurched, and swining, then began to tilt. Back, Era called, pulling Lena away from the slope. With a deafening crack, the ship's side gave way in a shower of sparks. The cubs leaped free just before the dropship slammed into the clearing, its engines erupting in a fireball that sent a hot wind rushing over the ridge. The remaining soldiers faltered, some breaking and running back toward the other 2 ships. The villagers pressed the advantage, arrows and spears cutting them down before they could regroup. When it was over, smoke drifted over the clearing. The surviving dropships lifted away, retreating into the clouds. Lena stood among the rocks, chest heaving, her ears still ringing. The cubs padded back to her one by one, fur streaked with soot and blood, but alive. The scarred cub stopped in front of her, lifting its head as if in triumph. "You saved them," she whispered, her throat tight. "You saved all of us." Era joined them, bow in hand, her face streaked with dirt. She looked at Lena for a long moment. "The council won't forget this," she said. "We'll send more, stronger. But now they know," she glanced at the cubs, "that they don't control everything they think they do." Lena looked out over the valley, the smoke still curling into the sky. The fight had been won, but she could feel that the war was only beginning. The scarred cub nudged her hand. She rested it on its head. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The valley was quiet in the days after the battle, too quiet. The villagers moved about their routines, repairing huts, restocking supplies, but their eyes often drifted to the mountain passes, as if expecting black dropships to appear at any moment. Lena stayed near the cubs. They seemed restless, pacing the edges of the village, ears constantly flicking toward distant sounds. The scarred one lingered close to her, as if unwilling to let her out of its sight. Era was the first to speak what everyone feared. "They are gathering," she said one evening, standing with Lena on the high ridge overlooking the valley. "The council will not risk another failure here. When they come, it will be with everything they have." Lena looked out at the dark horizon. How much time? Era's jaw tightened. Days, maybe less. That night, Lena lay awake in the guest hut, listening to the slow breathing of the cubs curled around her. Her mind churned. If the council attacked in full force, the villagers would stand no chance. They could run, but the cubs couldn't protect everyone at once. When dawn came, she found Era in the council hut with the other village elders. They fell silent as she entered. "I have an idea," Lena said. "I'm not sure you'll like it." She explained her plan. Not to wait for the attack, but to strike first not at the soldiers, but at the supply base in the mountains where the council stored fuel, weapons, and communications gear. Without it, they couldn't coordinate a full assault. Era's eyes narrowed. It's dangerous. It's the only way, Lena said. If we sit here, they'll crush us. The elders exchanged glances, then nodded grimly. By mid-morning, Lena and the cubs were climbing the northern ridge, traveling light. Era had given her a smaller, faster energy rifle and a pack of explosives carved from the same glowing resin as the villagers' arrowheads. The supply base was hidden in a narrow canyon, guarded by automated turrets and a pair of sentry drones. Lena and the cubs moved in silence, weaving between shadows, letting the wind mask their scent. When a drone passed overhead, the smallest cub leaped up, hooking its claws into the machine's underside and yanking it down. The others finished it quickly, dragging the wreck into the rocks. Inside the base, they found stacked crates of munitions, fuel cells humming faintly, and racks of rifles. Lena set the charges carefully, placing them near the fuel tanks and communications. Array? They were almost done when the alarm sounded. Soldiers poured into the canyon, weapons raised. Lena and the cubs fought their way toward the exit, blasts of energy tearing through the air. The scarred cub barreled into a soldier twice its size, knocking him into a wall. The smallest darted under another's legs, slashing at armor joints. Go, Lena shouted, slamming the last charge into place. They ran. The explosion hit like a lightning strike, a wall of heat and sound that sent them tumbling down the canyon slope. The sky lit orange, and when Lena looked back, the supply base was nothing but a rising pillar of fire. They didn't stop running until the valley came into view again. Era was waiting, bow in hand. When she saw the smoke curling from the distant mountains, she let out a long breath. They will retreat, she said, for now. Lena nodded, exhaustion sinking into her bones. Around her, the cubs settled into the grass, chests heaving. But eyes bright, she looked at them at the scarred one's steady gaze. The smallest ones flicking ears and knew they had all crossed a line. They were no longer just survivors. They were a pack, and the council, for all its power, had no idea how dangerous that could be.